So this is definitely a topic that gets a lot of attention. There's a lot of kind of different angles. It seems like an obsession for some. And then more recently, I've actually seen some sales trainers and coaches being like, doesn't matter, don't need it, which I think is really strange. But for anybody that doesn't know, the topic today is the truth about tonality and just tonality in general. So I guess kind of big picture, like what do you think of, or what does that word kind of mean to you, or what's your, I guess, loose definition?
Yeah, good question. I mean, for me, tonality, I mean, in simplistic terms, I would describe it as, the carrier, the displayer of emotion.
Mm.
Um, I guess beyond that, it signifies intent from the person that is speaking. So in our case, us as the salespeople. For the receiver, it can be a cue to process said communication in a certain way. And on the back of that, there may be an obvious response that is either suggested or appropriate or stimulated. And it's a way to have them, feel something as well, which I guess ties in with the emotion point, which was my first one as well. But, everybody knows that as far as communication go, words, I've seen various numbers, but let's just call it 10% of communication is through the actual words that you say, with the other 90% being the way you say it, which includes tonality, which includes body language, which includes facial expressions, and probably some other things as well I'm not thinking of right now. So,
Mhm.
when you put all those things together, I I can't see how anyone could craft an argument to say that it's not important and beyond that irrelevant. I mean, I would say as far as communication goes, it's tier one in terms of levels of importance. So I guess I've stated my position pretty strongly already as a
Yeah,
start point. What about you?
I think no, I agree so much, and I think, you know, I've always thought of like thinking about the industry and the business and the craft that I'm in. I tend not to think of myself in the sales business. Obviously, that's the industry that I do business in. But as far as internally, what my craft is, I've always thought it's communication. Because if I improve my communication, that translates, that's the foundation in which I can improve my sales. Right? If I don't improve my communication, very unlikely that my sales is going to improve, that my results are going to improve. So kind of the roots, not the fruits, so to speak. And yeah, it just boggles my mind that anybody could say that tonality doesn't matter. And I really feel sorry for them when it comes to relationships, because anybody that's been in a serious relationship knows how you say something is extremely important, right? And
Yep.
we've heard this, when we're children, I don't like your tone, right? It's not so much the words, but changing the tone changes how it's received. And so I think, as far as kind of the broad sense of what I think of tonality, like not in our industry, but just in general, it's, for me, it's like that system of sounds, right? It's the ability to turn the what into the how, right? So the words are obviously the what, but how they're delivered, kind of like, keys on a piano, right? The sequence and the pace and the volume and different things change how that message is received.
Yep.
And
Yep.
so that's kind of how I look at it. And I know there's always been an obsession over tonality. Um, and so, yeah, as far as in our industry, like you've kind of touched on it a little bit, but why is tonality spoke about so often, and why do you think people obsess over it or think it's so important?
Yeah, I just want to touch on one thing you said then before I answer that question. You said
Sure.
that you see yourself as being in the communication game, not the sales game, so to speak. And I just want to say that I agree with that. I've seen on other calls that you and I have done that selling is an outcome of certain things happening, of certain events happening, but it's not going to happen unless it's a layup sale and they've basically booked the call to join and you just have to guide them through and take their credit card details. But that's what, one in every 50 calls. Um, you know, communication is fundamental, and we've already established that the words that you say are approximately 10% of what is received from the other end, with tonality filling up a significant part of that remaining 90%. I don't know the exact number, but let's just say it's significant.
Mhm.
So I totally agree that we are in the communication game first and foremost. And with that being the case, and with what I just said about tonality being a significant portion of the remaining 90%, I just can't see how. I mean, I haven't even heard the arguments. I have heard people say, and other sales trainers say, that don't worry about tonality, forget about tonality, watch me do this without touching on the topic of tonality. But I actually have, if I'm honest, I haven't clicked on and seen what their explanation was. And I'm quite baffled to think that someone could underplay its significance. Is it the end all be all? I don't think any one factor is. I think everything we do is a combination of lots of factors done well. But it's certainly, as I said earlier, it's certainly tier one. So, what else is tier one? Definitely listening, definitely structuring and controlling the call as much as possible, and the quality of the questions that you ask, and then what you do with those questions. They would all be the tier one start points as far as I'm concerned. The words that you actually say would probably be tier two, using that example that I'm giving right now. For the reasons I said earlier, it's about 10% of what the other person actually hears. Now, after my little rant then, JD, I've actually lost track of what your initial question was. So I'm going to have to throw it back to you and ask you, what was the question again?
Yeah, so I guess more into the importance or how it relates specifically to our industry. Why is it so important for salespeople to develop and understand the tool of tonality?
Well, I guess I have to go back to what my first answer was. I mean, it's the carrier displayer of emotion. So it showcases, what your intent is in the question that you ask. It showcases, I guess, how you see yourself, how you see them, and they're going to respond incredibly differently depending on how they interpret that. I mean, if I'm asking questions or handling the call in a certain way, and tonality is a big part of that, where they get the feeling, whether it's intended or not, but they get the feeling that I am. Let me give a couple of negative examples. I am pontificating, or I am acting high and mighty or superior, or I am patronizing, or I am dismissive to their situation. If that's coming through in my tone, there's a very low chance this conversation is going in a good direction, because who wants to be on the receiving end of that? Yet the words that I could be saying could be the same as somebody else, but delivered in a completely different way. It makes them feel that, hey, this guy thinks he's better than me. Hey, this guy thinks that my problems are not real. Good luck taking the call to a good place if they're feeling that way. Tone is a big way that, that can be carried and transmitted. So, and then there's the flip side, of course. If your tonality is signaling to them and giving them cues that, hey, this guy is genuine, this guy is real, this guy is present, this guy is showing care and concern, this guy is perhaps using nurturing tonality when we're probing or going deep or asking for permission to go to a really vulnerable place. That's a time where nurturing tonality is absolutely the right play, in my experience, more often than not. Then that goodwill will be reciprocated, most likely. And the chances of them actually receiving and processing what you're saying to them and how you're saying it, and then opening up on the background and becoming honest and vulnerable and the truth starting to emerge, you've got a much higher chance of that happening. So again, I'm going to repeat myself, but I just can't see any reason why tonality wouldn't be such a key aspect and a key lever that we can pull in what we do.
Yeah, I agree. I think you touched on some really important notes there. One of the ways I look at it is just understanding humans, right? And understanding that information is typically absorbed and processed and analyzed, and it's a bit of a longer cycle to really understand something deeply, to really analyze something. It takes a lot of different aspects of the brain. It kind of creates a lag. But the way we're built in the primal sense is to use our senses to make instant judgments. And so when we see someone, right, we say like, oh, that person looks confident, right? And we make that judgment probably not on, whoa, that person uses the exact words of a confident person, right? It's how they carry themselves. That's through the sense of the eyes. And so that nonverbal communication you're talking about, even though it is kind of verbal, it's more of that person sounds confident, That person sounds kind. That person sounds reassuring, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a way for humans to pick up and make these judgments and kind of buy the time to be able to process the information that's being delivered. It kind of gives that like, okay, this person sounds like they know what they're talking about, or this person sounds like they have my best interest. You still, there's no magic tone of voice that you can use that's going to magically hypnotize your prospect to do whatever you say or ignore the cold hard facts. But it's a tool to be able to buy yourself time and align with the words that you're using. It basically, I mean, I hate to kind of play on the words, but you set the tone. Right? So there's a clue there. I think that's really important.
Yep. I agree. No doubt. Have you, out of interest, have you heard the arguments for those that dismiss the importance of tonality in a sales call or a sales interaction? Because I haven't heard them. I'm genuinely curious as to what they think.
You know me, I hang out deep in the bellows of the high ticket sales space. I'm in the dark net of remote sales. And so I have heard people kind of downplay it. And I understand a lot of it is maybe a controversy thing. Maybe it's kind of setting up the other side of like, oh, this person said it's awesome. I got to find this counterpoint to kind of grab some attention. So I think if you had an intellectual conversation with this person and talked about the things and that we're talking about and asked the question, I think they would probably land on the same point that we are. It might have just been a little bit of a stir up to get some eyeballs, but I have heard the point that it's overvalued or it's an obsession, and I think it's a really important point in that the problem I have with some of the tonality training is that they teach you what to say and then they teach you how to say it. So the idea is you go from, I'm just talking generalization, right? Is most people start out with a script and you don't know the script. And so you read the script. And when you read, it's very different than how I read out loud is different how I converse, right? And so I think that people are so limited when they come in because there's no teachings on the why. There's no deeper understanding of the conversational flow and how this was structured and why the framework is the way it is. So then the natural progression, because a lot of these companies have to have an upsell, they have to have the next thing, right? So we'll section it off and first we'll just give you the words. Then when you hit your next struggle point, we'll teach you how to say the words. Now, my problem with that is you don't really need a lot of, for me personally, this is my opinion, I don't think you need a lot of training on tonality. As you absorb and understand the communication cycle and you understand the human in front of you and you understand the scenario, it should be a point where like that genuineness has the tonality built in. We already are built with the tonality. We know how, like what surprise sounds like, or what angry sounds like, or what assertive sounds like, or what genuine and empathetic sounds like. We have those built in. We use them all day. So the problem that I have is disconnecting the human nature and like naturally conversing those ways compared to here's the what and here's how you say it. Because to me, again, that's very limiting. And when someone finds themselves head above or below water, they're not going to know how to adjust to that. They're going to be underprepared in different scenarios.
We're back in the territory of what our call a couple of weeks ago was, which was police behaviors, principles versus tactics. And it sounds like the example you just gave them was tactics without the underpinning of, beliefs and behaviors and the principles in play. And as we always use the example of Mike Tyson, everyone's got a plan until they get hit in the nose. So yeah, that's interesting. Okay. I hadn't heard that before.
Yeah. And I think it comes down to too, also, if you don't have those intentions, then you always have to kind of figure out a way to fake it until you make it. And so you have these people that their number one goal is to sell everybody on earth. They've been told over and over and over again, if you don't sell, it's because of your skill, you need more training. And if you do sell, it's because of the training you just bought. right?
Yep.
And so it's the message that salespeople are introduced to at an early stage in their career. And so whether or not they can challenge it, it's implanted into their brain that, okay, my goal is to sell everybody, right?
It's a hell of a pitch, isn't it? If you don't make the sales because of you, but if you make the sales because of the training that we sold you.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's always creating the scarcity and deficit of like, oh, I want, you know, if the goal is unreachable, then you always have something to buy, right? And so the more genuine you become in your sales approach, the more these things are going to happen naturally. The more you understand what's happening, the more you're going to be able to understand what tool to use in what space. And I think it's just those salespeople are disconnected that this is a real human conversation and that there's real people here that react to certain things. And so they're learning, like, what does an interested person sound like? What tone should I use in this point to get people to, like I talked about last time, like, okay, if I say this at this time, that will disarm them, instead of just being the person that wants receptivity and believing in what you're saying and having the right intentions. A lot of this stuff will come natural, but it has to be, the bad habits have to be unlearned first. And that's a real challenge for people.
Yep. Have you ever had, out of interest, have you ever had any formal training in tonality? I know I haven't, but what about yourself?
Yeah, I think way back, the old Wolf of Wall Street is big on tonality.
Okay. Have you done that training? Have you?
Yeah, I went to a seminar of his way back in my early days, and I was quite amazed at like how little fat in his communication there was. What I mean by that, it's like everything was strategic. There was no wasted words. Everything, he was so aware. But I also believe that comes from a place of he had to master tonality to sound like the person that he wanted people to believe he was. Right. And I'm not, people always rip on me and say, he's a changed man, leave him alone. All the power to him. Right. If he's changed and he's having a positive impact in the world, there's two different areas there. He was great at what he did. And even to sell a scam or rip people off, there's still the same elements that apply, but you have to learn how to act like the person telling the truth instead of the person telling the truth. Right. And so he was pretty masterful when it comes to tonality, but there's still that like human pickup of like, what's the hidden motive here? Right. It's like teaching someone how to sound genuine instead of teaching someone to be genuine. Right.
So just on that, I mean, did you pick up, if everything sort of looked and felt like it was all in place and all strategically planned, did you feel like you were interacting with a human being up there, or some pre-planned perfection play from a master salesman? What was your sense, if you can remember, to back then?
Yeah, I felt like a masterful salesman, someone who's mastered the art of communication and someone who knows how people respond.
Yeah.
I think understanding that most people are not super sure of themselves. Most people struggle with imposter syndrome. Most people struggle with scarcity mindset and limiting beliefs. And I think some people understand the persuasive tactics to leverage those things, right, while flying under the radar. And so I'm not saying at that time that his intentions weren't pure, but from my standpoint, there was just this questioning of like, it's too perfect, or it seems like it's just someone who mastered how to act like a human.
Yeah.
But I wasn't all like, from someone who has that background and door to door. And honestly, I didn't develop a lot of empathy until probably mid-20s, where I started to really actually care first about people, to be honest. And so, you know, I could resonate with some of the trainings I learned in door to door and early on. Definitely.
Can I just ask one final question about that? So
sure.
You were in awe, but would you actually buy from that person if they were selling to you?
I think when I was younger,
being aware of what you said a moment ago, like you having noticed what's going on, and you know, would you actually buy from a person if that were in play?
I think there was a time when I definitely would have. when I lacked a certain level of self-awareness and probably had more insecurity. Also, I was more idealistic back then, or maybe that's not even the right word, but I looked up to people and I kind of put pedestals up of like, well, this person's better than this person because of this success in this area. And so for now, like at this point in my life, I want that genuineness. I can pick up the signals. And for me, it just sends off this radar of like, kind of iceberg theory of like, they're only giving me 10%. What's behind it? What's behind it? And I think we mentioned this on our last call, this idea of I'm lost in the awe of a great salesperson. So I never get lost in the conversation. I never get lost in the connection, but I'm almost like in awe of this person's sales ability. So when I was younger, 19 to probably 22, I probably would have bought everything off the shelf because I'm like, I want that. But later on in life, that stuff has become less attractive to me, and making those genuine connections has also had an ROI on it as well.
Yeah. I suspected you were going to say that, and that's why I asked the question. And I know we're going off on a little tangent here, but that to me ties in with one of the comments you made on a call a week or two ago, where you became aware of the system they were using, how they were mirroring everything you said, and then your head ended up focusing on them, and the conversation really was in their space, not in your space, which is always the worst, in my view, is the worst scenario for a sales call. You don't want them to be aware that they're dealing with a masterful salesperson. You don't want them to be aware that they're in a sales call and following a sales procedure. You don't want them to be aware that they're basically leading you down a path which is going to result in you parting with money down the track. I mean, that's why I asked you that question, because I don't know that maybe the young version of me, the naive version of me, the much easier influenced and persuaded version of me may have brought from that person knowing all of that then, but not the me of today, and not the me, not who I sell to either. It's the opposite. You want the last thing for them to be aware of, that they're on a. I mean, they know they're on a sales call. Don't get me wrong, but they don't want it to feel like you're ticking boxes on the call. They can predict your response to every answer that they give. If those things are happening, and Tonality be one of the ways to showcase that that's happening, I think you're in a bad place, and you lose that genuine connection and the feeling that they're dealing with a human being who actually is present and cares about their reality, as opposed to a sales pro who's working off a list and just leading you perfectly into a corner, and very soon you're going to part with money. And I don't think anyone wants to be in that situation.
No, I think you're right. I think humans oftentimes believe that they want perfection, but when perfection is presented, they actually want flaws, right? Like there's something in our brains that kind of sets off an alarm when something doesn't have flaws, when it's too artificial, and we look and be like, that's not what I've seen before. So it kind of sets that alarm off, especially the more introspective you are and the more accepting of yourself and others you are, the more you start to realize like, okay, I'm flawed, everybody else is flawed, this person's perfect. It's like your brain is just like, no, something's wrong here. So
I couldn't agree more. That's why, a big part of my sales performance, for whatever better word, whilst it doesn't change, my morals and my compass as to what needs to happen on a sales call, but there will be moments where I'll intentionally stutter. There will be moments where I'll display that I've lost my train of thought and invite them to help me, finish a sentence. Or there will be times where I'll stop a sentence in order to, I guess, not seem too polished, and also, show them that I'm really thinking through the moment in the present. Like, JD, can you help me? I mean, I haven't even worked out really what I'm trying to ask you, but can you help me understand? I'll do something like that. Because I already know the question I want to ask. So things like that are disarming, and we've talked about disarming in the past. I think last week or the week before we talked about disarming. Things like that are disarming. They feel that they're speaking to a real human being who's present in the conversation. Again, not that canned response, not that canned sequence of events. Everything's not too perfect. It actually is a negative when you don't display any weakness or vulnerability on the sales call, because it makes them start
100%.
Subconsciously or even consciously, this guy's just a little bit too perfect. This guy's just a little bit too prepared, and what's going, that sets off alarms, and that's not a good thing.
Yeah. Yeah. So I have a few areas that I focus on with tonality, but again,
Mhm.
it's trying to come up from that natural point. Like, are you aware of, like, is there certain tonality or certain times for a certain tonality that you focus on? Obviously, you could break down a call and maybe there's 40 different, but what are some of the core changes in your tonality, and when do those come?
Nothing's pre-planned as far as tonality comes, because I am generally receptive to who I'm speaking to and how the call's going. So none of it's pre-planned. I do have a call structure. I don't have a script, but I have a sequence of things that I want to tick off. I am flexible to a degree with the sequence they happen in, but I know that there's some key things that need to be marked off in order for me to establish if I think I can help this person or not. So I guess I'll give a couple of examples of tonality plays. The first one is nurturing. So anytime I'm going to ask something personal or deep, or something that could be deemed inappropriate if not handled correctly, I will absolutely use both nurturing language and nurturing tonality. And I'll always give them permission to reject answering the question, or tell me no, or tell me if I've overstepped the line. So that is a huge one. Like, I will never just come in and say, is that because you had a traumatic experience as a child, completely out of context. I would soften that up so much with words, so much with tonality, and I'd ask them permission once to ask them a personal question, and then if I know it's going to be a real banger of a question that's going to go deep, when they say yes, I'll then ask again. I say, "Are you sure?" I said, "I'm going to ask you something really personal now. It's totally okay if you tell me no or don't want me to, go there. But based on your answers, I've got this overwhelming curiosity to understand something that I can't quite reconcile yet." And they'll almost always then give me permission, and then I'll ask it. I'll say, "Well, look, based on your answers, I get the feeling that, something happened, perhaps in your childhood that, has got you feeling this way, which you haven't quite squared off yet. I mean, am I totally misreading that, or is there something there?"
Yeah.
Often I've read it right, not always. And then they'll go, "No, you're not wrong. You are reading it right." And then I'll say, "Would you be open to sharing that, or would that be crossing the line?" And they'll almost always, if delivered right, say, "No, I'm happy to talk about that." And then they may talk about something completely life transforming that happened when they were 15 years old that still shapes their personality today and has ultimately led them to this call today. But if I didn't handle that right, I would never got that from them, and the conversation would have stayed surface level, and I would have missed all the gold. And generally, if you can get somebody to go that deep on a call and speak that frankly, and really bring out their pain and their fears and their hopes and their dreams and their realities, there's a really high chance you're going to get a sale from that point. So that is one example of using nurturing language and permission-based language and showing vulnerability. Like, hey, maybe I'm just reading this completely wrong. So I'm inviting them to tell me that I'm wrong, and I'm okay if I'm told I'm wrong, because you're going to correct me with the truth, which is what I want. I want the truth. So that would be probably the best example. But apart from that, it's just trying to be genuine, trying to be present, and have my tonality, reflect that, of course. Definitely curiosity. Never, ever, ever, regardless of the circumstances in play, never, ever, ever a feeling of superiority, or I know more than you, or I'm smarter than you, or how could you be so stupid and still be doing that or not know that. Never, ever, ever anything in that space. That's what serves me. But what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I was trying to break it down, because it's one of those things that once you build it into that genuineness, I know we just keep slamming that word, but it's really important. It's harder to think about what is my tone, or when do I use it, because again, like you said, it's not planned of like, okay, 5 minutes in, I'm going to change my tone to this. It's kind of more of a dance partner situation, in that they move this way, and so you react to that, or vice versa. You want them to kind of move in the direction, so you kind of plant those seeds. And so for me, I actually kind of wrote out a couple, and it just worked out that they're all C's and E's. So I'll go through the list so everybody can, if you want to take notes. First, I have certainty, concern, enthusiasm, or interest, but I wanted to keep the C's and E's, right? Empathy, confused, curiosity, and care. So certainty, concern, enthusiasm, empathy, confused, curiosity, and care. And when I look through my calls, when I listen, those are probably, I would say, if they're not in every call, like all of it, they're in the majority. And so the certainty is I have information that they don't. And sometimes I'll tell the prospect this. I'll say, Michael, listen, I know you're at an extreme disadvantage here because you're on the outside of this and I get to see this every day. So I'm not expecting you to have the same level of certainty that I do. Right. And so I understand the position of like, I know what happens on the other side of this. I know I've talked to the success stories. I know the people who struggle and then come through and get success. Like I get to see that every day. And I think salespeople forget that sometimes, that we have all the answers. We get to see the grass is greener. The other person is guessing, hoping, making logical connection, feeling it, but they don't have the same access to proof that we do. They don't live it on a daily basis. And so sometimes I need to leverage my certainty. And what I tell students and prospects is you can leverage the certainty I have until you have your own. That's totally natural. It's very hard to take a lot of actions in high uncertainty. And so I will change my tone to be very certain about the things, to express that this is not something I'm, best case scenario. This is what it is. So when I'm expressing facts, when I'm kind of taking the guesswork out of certain things, I'll change my tone to a more certain, more direct. I'll even change some of my wording. So I will say absolutely 100%. But I won't go to that well too often, because if I start, people always say use power language. But if you're using power language in areas that anyone logical can say, well, there's no way there's 100% success rate, right? Of course, right? So I'm not going to talk about, I think we talked a few calls back about, that there's flawless, of course, everybody's going to get to this point. No, the results may vary, some assembly required, right? And so, but when there are certain points around my support or what we offer, and I know that that's set in stone, certainty is one. Concern and empathy kind of go together for me. Concern is sometimes a prospect won't be reacting in a way where they're telling me something that to me is very alarming. Like the results have been getting worse and worse, or there's a sense of urgency and their emotion or how they're presenting themselves. Some people have a nervous laugh. Some people try and like make a joke after they tell you something bad. And I just allow and just make the appropriate concern. It's nonverbal, but it's also in my tone. I kind of have a softer, quieter voice and then that's how I'm asking my digging questions. So they don't get to, I want them to know that this is a place where we can talk about those difficult things, but I also want them to know that I am concerned about if they continue in that direction, what may happen. Enthusiasm, I think, is really important for me. When I see someone making those progress or those little decisions, I want to kind of subconsciously celebrate those. And I want to be enthusiastic about their goals and their vision, and they want to buy a boat or they want to put their kids through, like, I want to be enthusiastic about the things that they're enthusiastic about. It's not that I share the same interest. It's that someone that I care about in this moment, right, has something that they're pursuing and I'm enthusiastic about it. I might ask questions about that specific thing. And then I won't go through all of them, but you mentioned curiosity, which I think is one of the most attractive qualities to bring on a call. And I just think it's so impactful for us to be genuinely curious. But the one I will touch on that's a little different is confusion. And so how I use confusion is to draw out and kind of show or represent a gap in logic. So instead of, a lot of people, there's a right and a wrong, and if we're right and they're wrong, we both lose. They have the veto power. They can say no out of spite, and we lost our chance. But for me, like the confusion of how did we come up with this, Or can you explain this a little bit more? Or so when you do this, what's going to happen now? Like, it comes from an interested point, and I am not making that instant judgment. I'm not representing that they're wrong. I just want to see how they got there. And confusion for me is one of the best tools, because I can, again, take that vulnerability you talked about in the past, right? And I can put it on me, like, I'm sorry, Michael, can you help me understand how you got here, or what comes next from there? And so it's my ignorance and my, I can't keep up, that allows them to have to explain. And then usually we get to the break in logic. So
Yep.
those are some of the C's and E's that I focus on as far as tonality.
Yeah, I think confusion is a great one. And building on what you said then, I think confusion enables two things to happen. It enables the truth to emerge. So for you to extract the truth from them, because they, you're really giving them some rope, I guess, and you're letting them clarify the reality. So, I might be saying, JD, can you help me understand why we're even speaking today? And then they will fill in the gaps. I might say, before I do that, I might pump you up a little bit, provide some context. I'm like, JD, you're a busy guy that runs one of the biggest masterminds for closers in the industry, and I know you've got 100 things going on. I mean, I know you're a busy guy. The obvious question I got is, why have you booked a call with me today? What is it you're hoping to get from today's call? So you will now fill in the gaps, and you might say, well, look, I'm a busy guy and have got a lot of things going on. However, and the however is the gold. And the other thing it does too is it enables, or it invites them to help you. So by showing that vulnerability, which again is the antithesis of the example that you gave with Jordan Belfort earlier, where he was just so perfect and had everything so pre-planned. There was no vulnerability. I would imagine there was no vulnerability shown there at all. And as a result, the you of today would probably smell a rat. But by showing vulnerability, like, hey, I might be reading this completely wrong, or help me understand what you're seeing, what I'm not seeing, because I'm clearly having a bad day here. By showing that vulnerability, it invites them to metaphorically reach out and offer you a hand. And people generally like helping people if it's someone that they don't dislike and it's a reasonable ask. Most reasonable people will give that metaphorical hand, that that strengthens the connection on the call. It strengthens trust and codependence to a degree, and it's a sign of goodwill, which is always a good thing when it comes, well, either way on the call. So the confused tonality and the confused play is a massive lever to pull. Massive lever to pull. I would say there's not a sales call I do that I don't at some stage ask them to help me understand what I'm missing here, or help me understand why we're even talking today, or help me understand why a busy guy like you is considering taking on a fourth business. I mean, what am I missing here? A big part of, I've done some posts on this recently where I've said that it's now got to a stage in my sales calls where they justify more to me and sell themselves in for the fact they need this more than me actually doing the opposite. So it's a beautiful pull mechanism to do. One of the best for sure.
Love it. Any final thoughts on tonality? Anything before we wrap up?
I mean, you playing the confusion card. I'm genuinely confused as to why, and this isn't me play acting, I'm genuinely confused as to how anyone that's striving to be an elite sales pro could underplay the significance of tonality. I genuinely don't have the answer, and I'd be really keen to hear if it's just a headline to grab attention, or if it's a genuine belief with the genuine strategy and tactic underpinning it. I can't see it, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't exist, and it doesn't mean that I'm right. So I'm all ears. If someone's got it, please tell me.
Yeah, so if there's anybody that disagrees with anything or feels like tonality is overrated, or that it's not a powerful tool, let us know in the comments. Again, this is, we don't feel like we're the gatekeepers of this. This is just two experiences, two opinions, and we're always open to ideas. I didn't get to share, but I thought of one thing, and I just want to, this is my final note. I'm in Guatemala right now. My Spanish is not great, but I can tell a sad song without under that song. It moves me in a certain direction. It stirs up a reaction in me, even if I'm not totally understanding of what is being said. And to me, that highlights the power and opportunity when it comes to tonality.
Great example. Yeah, great example.
All right, Michael, pleasure as always.
Likewise.
I appreciate everybody that showed up. And again, let us know what you want us to talk about on a future episode. Appreciate y'all. Have a good day.
Thanks, JD. See you soon.
Bye.